Epic of Gilgamesh is a very ancient story. In fact, I think it's agreed upon it's basically the first epic poem, one of the first stories of humanity that we have a record of. Earlier versions of it were originally composed in Sumerian around 3000 BC almost. We have little bits of it from then, sort of little clay tablets that we have pieces of it. The standard version, what's called the standard version, was finalized in 1750 BC. And it's one of my favorite stories, actually. It's something that I kind of get an obsession with once in a while. And I don't know how you guys felt about it. I guess we'll talk about it during the discussion. But every year I ask students sort of their impression, and a lot of them, generally about half, didn't really like the ending. They thought it was kind of cool, and there were cool adventures and things like that happened. But then the ending, they thought it kind of was like a little lame. And then I try to explain to them. I think most of them end up seeing, wow, okay, it's actually a really beautiful story in the end when you understand why it does what it does as a story. So I don't know how much I want to summarize it. Let me look at the questions. Maybe I'll use that as the guide for this. A guy named Gilgamesh, king. He is, at the beginning of the epic, unsettled. How do we know he's unsettled? Well, look, what does he do all the time in the first tablet? What is he? It describes him as basically beating people up just for fun, just to sort of show how much stronger he is. And it says he does not leave a wife to her husband or a daughter to her parents. He goes around and sleeps with whoever he wants to sleep with, especially newlywed brides, that kind of prima nocta thing. So that's what he does. That's his thing. As king, he's a very, very sort of tyrannical king. He goes, he sleeps with whatever woman he wants, and he just beats up any guy that gets in his way. So how do we know he's unsettled? Because that's the way he lives. If that's the way you live, and sort of with that kind of intensity required to keep you happy, if you need to oppress others in order to sort of be at peace or be okay, you're a kind of screwed up human being. You're at least unsettled, at least lack of peace in you. Why is he unsettled, though? Well, we don't really find that out until later. It's never spelled out, but it seems to me that Gilgamesh is unsettled because he's alone. Now, he's not alone in the sense of living out in the woods or something like that, like Enkidu, the guy we're going to meet pretty soon. He's alone in the sense of not having any friends, because he's so big and strong and powerful and oppressive that he doesn't have anybody who's an equal. And a friend has to be somebody you consider an equal. And if you see everybody as beneath you, in the end, you're just truly lonely. You just have nobody in your life. All you have are sort of servants or slaves or something like that. So I think there's a kind of cyclical thing. He oppresses others because he's sort of friendless, and he's friendless because he oppresses others. And that is sort of his life as we meet him at the beginning of the epic. So then the people of Uruk, his city, cry out to the gods. Why is he oppressing us like this? The gods create. One of the gods, I think Anu, creates this guy Enkidu, who's a kind of beast man. He runs with the gazelles and he lives out in the wild. He's never like met anybody. So eventually they create Enkidu so that eventually he can sort of put Gilgamesh in check. Okay. It doesn't really happen right away. Enkidu goes and he kind of terrorizes the farmers. So Gilgamesh is terrorizing the city people. Enkidu starts terrorizing the farmers. The farmers cry out as well. They cry out to Gilgamesh. So there's a kind of parallel already happening between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. There is the terrorizing of Gilgamesh of the city. There's terrorizing of Enkidu of the farmers. The city people cry out to the gods. The farmers cry out to Gilgamesh. The gods send Enkidu. Gilgamesh sends Shamhat the prostitute. Very interesting parallels are happening here. Shamhat, so this is number 5. Shamhat, the prostitute, finds Enkidu and sleeps with him. It says for 6 days and 7 nights or something like that. So long time. And after that, Enkidu is tired. He's weak. And he can no longer run with the gazelles. And so that woman he's with, Shamhat, sort of, he returns to her after he tries to run with the gazelles and he can't. And she gives him part of her clothing, because he was naked before. She gives him beer and she gives him bread. These are the sort of symbols of civilization. You can wear a piece of leather, out in the wild, but to get cloth, you need a city. You need people to sort of make the cloth and weave it and make it into clothing and stuff like that. You can eat, grains, but in order to have bread, you need an oven and you need something to mash the grains. You need a city in order to have bread. You can drink water or whatever fruits, and you can eat fruits and stuff like that, but in order to have beer, you need some way to ferment. You need a city for all these things. So it's a very sort of interesting thing. In order to be a sort of non-animal, in order to be a civilized human being, you need to feel weak. And that weakness causes you to cling to other human beings, and that's what makes you kind of build a kind of primordial city, or at least a kind of first family or first community, which is what we see in Enkidu and Shamhat. So why must Enkidu be with a woman before he becomes civilized? Because if he's super powerful and strong, he'll never feel the weakness and therefore never feel the need for another human being. In fact, number 4 has the same answer. Why must Gilgamesh fight Enkidu before they can become friends? Because until he fights Enkidu, he never feels weak. Even though he wins that fight, he almost loses. And for the first time in his life, he feels weak. And that weakness, it's very funny. He goes from fighting Enkidu, because Enkidu gets in his way. He's going to go sleep with some bride. Enkidu stops him. They fight. And now that he's weak, he feels this weakness within himself. He immediately wants a friend. So there's a very interesting kind of cause-effect relationship between feeling and understanding our weakness and reaching out to others for friendship. And without that, if we're just sort of living a kind of prideful life, I don't need anybody, I'm the greatest ever, we're in the end just going to be alone. Okay. I'm doing good on time, actually. I'm happy. What parallels are there between Gilgamesh's development and Enkidu's? I've already started that. Maybe I'll write this on the board on Thursday. You have Gilgamesh is a tyrant terrorizing the city. Enkidu is terrorizing the farmers. The city people cry out to the gods. The farmers cry out to Gilgamesh. The gods send Enkidu. Gilgamesh sends Shamhat. Enkidu weakens Gilgamesh. Shamhat weakens Enkidu. Different ways. One is a fight, the other is sex. Gilgamesh befriends Enkidu. Enkidu becomes civilized and wears clothing and stuff like that. So there's the idea of civilization, being civilized part of a city, and being a friend are seen as very parallel here, which I think is right. A city is not just a bunch of people living in the same place. It's a bunch of people that are connected to each other out of both need and friendship. Okay. And then out of because they're both in this kind of awareness of their weakness, they become friends. It allows them the possibility for friendship. And what happens as soon as they become friends? The most natural thing in the world, they go on a road trip. They go on a journey together. So now it's no longer, I'm just going to sit in my city and do whatever I want. The minute you have a friend, so you go from selfishness to weakness to friendship, friendship becomes a catalyst for greatness, because now they're friends and they want to do something big. No longer just the same junk I was doing all my life. I want to do something cool. So they go on this trip to defeat this monster, Humbaba, that lives up in Lebanon. So this all takes place in what's now Iraq. They go up to Lebanon. Why? Because there's the cedar forest there. There's a kind of funny historical thing. Lebanon had the biggest and most prominent forest in the Middle East because of the way its climate was. And if you needed to build anything out of wood, you can't build anything out of palm trees or olive trees. They grow so slowly and they don't get big enough. You need to go to Lebanon and get cedars. In fact, Solomon sent for cedar wood to build the temple. Okay, so similarly, Gilgamesh and Enkidu are going up to Lebanon to defeat this monster that's stopping people from getting these trees to build with. So what they're doing is actually promoting civilization by defeating this monster. Very interesting thing. They go up, they defeat him. It takes a journey. It takes 6 days, 7 nights. There's all kinds of stuff like that in there. And they defeat him, and they send logs down the river, like Euphrates, down to back to Ur, to help people build buildings there. So their victory immediately promotes the building of cities. Okay. Then, after he's victorious, Gilgamesh comes back, and this goddess falls in love with him named Ishtar. There's a whole bunch of funny stuff there. She tries to sleep. I mean, she knows he's married, but she tries to sleep with him. He insults her, like he lists all of her previous lovers, which is insulting enough. And then he explains how all of them like died, which is pretty insulting too. She's pissed off. She tells her dad, who is this god. Her dad sends the bull of heaven to punish Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill the bull of heaven, which is another insult. You see where they're pissing off the gods now. There's a kind of hubris here. In the final act of hubris, after they kill the bull of heaven, Enkidu takes a piece of the thigh, I think, of the bull of heaven and just chucks it at Ishtar's face. Which, like, there's a lot of insults, but just throwing a piece of raw meat at somebody's face is pretty bad. That was a step too far. And it was a kind of a blasphemy. And Enkidu falls sick because he does that, and he dies. And Gilgamesh mourns him for 6 days and 7 nights. That same number, I'll just tell you what that means. That number indicates weakness. 6 days and 7 nights. Okay, is a kind of symbol of weakness. And he sees a maggot fall out of Enkidu's nose. That freaks him out because because a friend is a kind of other self. And Enkidu sees that terrifying, nasty thing and realizes that's going to happen to him. And so he does not want to accept his mortality, the fact that he's going to die, because there's still some pride left in him. And he goes on this journey where he wants to find the fruit of immortality. He does this by, first he's wandering for a while. He meets Shamhat, the bartender of the gods, the barmaid of the gods, who's one of my favorite characters ever. Sorry, not Shamhat, Siduri, who's one of my favorite characters ever. I named my cat after her. That's how much I love this character. And she tells him, dude, accept that you're mortal, go home, enjoy your life, play with your kids, and die when you're supposed to die. He can't handle that wisdom. He keeps journeying. He finds, so he's looking basically for the one person who became immortal, who was this guy Utanapishtim, who was basically Noah. He survived the flood. And it looks like there actually was a flood in the early Middle East that Genesis and Gilgamesh are both recording. So the guy that survived the flood is in the epic named Utanapishtim, and he has a wife. And Gilgamesh says, well, I'm going to go see this guy. He goes to see him. He has to take a long boat journey. A guy named Urshanabi takes him there. Finally sees Utanapishtim. He's like, oh, come on, I want to be immortal like you. Utanapishtim says, no, it's only given to me and my wife. I can't give that to you. He freaks out. Oh, sorry. Something important happens before that. Utanapishtim says, all right, look, I'll tell you, but you need to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. That same symbol. Gilgamesh is like, okay, cool, I can do that. He falls asleep immediately, and he sleeps for that long. instead of staying awake for that long. Shows how weak he is. Utnapishtim has his wife make a loaf of bread each day to show how much the first one has rotted to prove to him how long he was sleeping. He wakes up, he's like, oh, I was just resting my eyes. No, you fell asleep for this long. Look at this bread. Gilgamesh is like all sad, dejected. Utnapishtim's wife says, well, tell him about the thing. Gilgamesh is like, what thing? And then Utnapishtim is like, okay, there's a thing. At the bottom of the ocean, there's a plant. If you eat that plant, you won't die. Okay, Gilgamesh is like, yes! Ties rocks to his feet, dives to the bottom of the ocean, grabs the plant, it stings somebody, grabs it anyway, cuts off the cords, rises to the surface of the water. He's like, victorious, USA, USA. Decides to take it home with him to share with the elders of his village. Noble thing to think about, right? Shows that he's developed as a character. On his way back, takes a bath. A snake comes, eats the plant. The snake sheds its skin, right? Becomes young again and goes away. He lost it. He lost everything. At that point, Gilgamesh, it's sort of read between the lines. He just kind of laughs at himself. He's like, you know what? That was a stupid idea in the first place. I need to accept that I'm mortal. Finally, he's learned his lesson. Ur-Shanabi takes him home, the boatman. Gilgamesh brags about the walls of the city. The end. So you can kind of see maybe some people will not like the ending here. I think the ending is kind of out of nowhere. But let's work through this. Is Gilgamesh noble or silly for seeking immortality? Well, kind of both, right? You can kind of see like, I want to, seeking after greatness. There's a kind of nobility there, but you're seeking something. Bodily immortality is not for human beings. You're seeking something unnatural, sort of against nature when you're doing that. What significance does sleep have in the Epic of Gilgamesh? Sleep symbolizes death. Why? Well, it's kind of, several times in the epic, different people point out, well, the sleeper and the dead, how alike they are. You look like you're dead when you're sleeping. So the idea that he slept for 6 days and 7 nights, the idea that he couldn't stay awake, he fell asleep with Utnapishtim. Well, the whole punchline of that is, dude, you want to not die? You can't even not sleep. In fact, there's something even more profound, which I think is amazing here. What happens when you're sleeping a lot of times? You dream. And dreams in the Epic of Gilgamesh are always a little bit weird. I don't know if you noticed that. And they never make sense to the person that dreamed them. Until, Gilgamesh has to go to his mom a couple times. He goes to Enkidu a couple times. Enkidu goes to Gilgamesh a couple times, tells them the dream. And then your mom or your friend or whatever kind of, oh, I know what this dream means. And they interpret it and they tell you the sort of symbolic meaning of the dream. Here's something I want to present to you guys. Maybe I'll write this on the board when I get there on Thursday too. There's a parallel here. There is death and sleep. But there's also dreaming above sleep. And then there's also life above death. It's sort of saying dreams, there's a kind of analogy. Dreams are to sleep as life is to death. Living is sort of the dream part of death. Dreams are sort of the living part of sleeping. There's a kind of fun, interesting parallel there. But what else is it telling us? If your dreams don't make any sense until they're interpreted by a dream interpreter, which is your mom or your friend or something like that, they're just meaningless, weird things that don't make any sense at all. It seems like that the Epic of Gilgamesh is telling us that life does not make sense. It's a weird, chaotic, crazy thing until we share it with somebody else. And that other person gives it meaning as they interpret it. It's sort of, they help us to understand that life does mean something. And without them, we could never understand that. Friends and others give meaning to life. Without them, life is meaningless. The same way that dreams make no sense when they're not interpreted by somebody else. I think that's one of the sort of intentional messages of the Epic of Gilgamesh to show just how social human beings are and how much we're meant to live in a city. What significance do friends have in the Epic of Gilgamesh? They're the ones that interpret life for us. They're the ones that give life meaning. Now I'm going to conclude today. Okay, I did pretty okay on time. The very first chunk, the first sort of page of the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's a lot missing to it, the little dot, the little lacunae. But the first image that we run into after we're introduced to the hero is the walls of the city of Uruk. It tells us how big they are, how long they took to build, blah, 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 all this stuff. And then the last thing that we meet in the Epic of Gilgamesh is Gilgamesh describing the walls of the city to Ur-Shanabi. And he's sort of proud of them. So the walls of the city are sort of walls of the epic. The poem is walled in by the walls of the city of Uruk. That's obviously a sort of meaningful. That's done on purpose. The walls of a city, why are they so prominent as a symbol? They're not just the things that keep animals and marauders out. They're the things that keep us together. The walls of the city symbolize our connection to each other and our need for each other, the weakness that leads to a true connection between human beings that we call friendship. So the walls of the city of Uruk are really the most kind of final, beautiful sort of symbol of all of this, that they symbolize civilization itself, because the word civilization comes from civitas in Latin, meaning city. Civilization is interconnectedness between human beings, which we're going to talk a lot about during this class. And that is something that is built into human nature, because in Genesis, it is not good for man to be alone. This is the Gilgamesh version of that. I think that's basically all I want to talk about today, as far as just kind of throwing the lecture out there. When we meet, somebody asked me about the Lion of Babylon and asked me about the fig leaf. And I'll save that for discussion, just so we have at least a couple new things to talk about besides questions you guys might have in the material. All right. I will see you Thursday, and God bless.